Hello everyone, thank you for being here for a reading of How to Tame a Wild Tongue, written by Gloria Anzaldua. If this video helped you, or if you enjoyed it, please like it and subscribe to my channel. It helps me to be able to keep supporting you all. If you have any requests for short stories or poetry or summaries and analyses, please let me know in the comments. And just dropping a comment to say thanks or hi also greatly helps me out. Feel free to ask me any questions related to your homework that you think I can help with. Stay lit with Simply Lit. How to Tame a Wild Tongue, written by Gloria Anzaldua. We're going to have to control your tongue, the dentist says, pulling out all the metal from my mouth. Silver bits plop and tinkle into the basin. My mouth is a mother lode. The dentist is cleaning out my roots. I get a whiff of the stench when I gasp. I can't cap that tooth yet, you're still draining, he says. We're going to have to do something about your tongue, I hear the anger rising in his voice. My tongue keeps pushing out the wads of cotton, pushing back the drills, the long, thin needles. I've never seen anything as strong or as stubborn, he says. And I think, how do you tame a wild tongue? Train it to be quiet? How do you bridle and saddle it? How do you make it lie down? Who is to say that robbing a people of its language is less violent than war? Ray Gwynn Smith. I remember being caught speaking Spanish at recess. That was good for 3 licks on the knuckles with a sharp ruler. I remember being sent to the corner of the classroom for talking back to the Anglo teacher when all I was trying to do was tell her how to pronounce my name. If you want to be American, speak American. If you don't like it, go back to Mexico where you belong. I want you to speak English. Para hallar buen trabajo tienes que saber hablar el inglés bien. Que vale toda tu educación si todavía hablas inglés con un accent, my mother would say, mortified that I spoke English like a Mexican. At Pan American University, I and all Chicano students were required to take 2 speech classes, their purpose to get rid of our accents. Attacks on one's form of expression with the intent to censor are a violation of the First Amendment. El Anglo con cara de inocente nos arrancó la lengua. Wild tongues can't be tamed. They can only be cut out. Overcoming the tradition of silence. Ahogadas escupimos el oscuro, peleando con nuestra propia sombra. El silencio nos sepulta. En boca cerrada no entran moscas. Flies don't enter a closed mouth is a saying I kept hearing when I was a child. Ser habladora was to be a gossip and a liar, to talk too much. Muchachitas bien criadas, well-bred girls don't answer back. Es una falta de respeto to talk back to one's mother or father. I remember one of the sins I'd recite to the priest in the confession box the few times I went to confession. Talking back to my mother. Hablar para atrás. Repelar. Ociona. Repelona, chismosa. Having a big mouth, questioning, carrying tales are all signs of being malcriada. In my culture, they are all words that are derogatory if applied to women. I've never heard them applied to men. The first time I heard 2 women, a Puerto Rican and a Cuban, say the word nosotras, I was shocked. I had not known the word existed. Chicanas use nosotros whether we're male or female. We are robbed of our female being by the masculine plural. Language is a male discourse. And our tongues have become dry. The wilderness has dried out our tongues, and we have forgotten speech. Irina Klepfis. Even our own people, other Spanish speakers, nos quieren poner candados en la boca. They would hold us back with their bag of reglas de academia. Oye, como ladra el lenguaje de la frontera. Quien tiene boca se equivoca, Mexican saying. Pocho, culture traitor, you're speaking the oppressor's language by speaking English, you're ruining the Spanish language. I have been accused by various Latinos and Latinas. Chicano Spanish is considered by the purists and by most Latinos deficient, a mutilation of Spanish. But Chicano Spanish is a border tongue which develops naturally. Change, evolución, enriquecimiento de palabras nuevas por invención o adaptación have created variants of Chicano Spanish, un nuevo lenguaje. Un lenguaje que corresponde a un modo de vivir. Chicano Spanish is not incorrect, it is a living language. For a people who are neither Spanish nor live in a country in which Spanish is the first language, for a people who live in a country in which English is a reigning tongue but who are not Anglo, for a people who cannot entirely identify with either standard, formal Castilian, Spanish, nor standard English, what recourse is left to them but to create their own language, a language which they can connect their identity to, one capable of communicating the realities and values true to themselves, a language with terms that are neither Español ni Inglés, but both. We speak a patois, a forked tongue, a variation of two languages. Chicano Spanish sprang out of the Chicanos' need to identify ourselves as a distinct people. We needed a language with which we could communicate with ourselves, a secret language. For some of us, language is a homeland closer than the Southwest. For many Chicanos today live in the Midwest and the East. And because we are a complex, heterogeneous people, we speak many languages. Some of the languages we speak are 1. Standard English, 2. Working class and slang English, 3. Standard Spanish, 4. Standard Mexican Spanish, 5. North Mexican Spanish dialect, 6. Chicano Spanish. Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California have regional variations, 7. Tex-Mex, 8. Pachuco, called Calo. My home tongues are the languages I speak with my sisters and brothers, with my friends. They are the last 5 listed, with 6 and 7 being closest to my heart. From school, the media, and job situations, I picked up standard and working class English. From Mama Grande Locha and from reading Spanish and Mexican literature, I picked up standard Spanish and standard Mexican Spanish. From Los Recién Llegados, Mexican immigrants and braceros, I learned the North Mexican dialect. With Mexicans, I'll try to speak either standard Mexican Spanish or the North Mexican dialect. From my parents and Chicanos living in the valley, I picked up Chicano Texas Spanish, and I speak it with my mom, younger brother, who married a Mexican and who rarely mixes Spanish with English, aunts, and older relatives. With Chicanas from Nuevo Mexico, or Arizona, I will speak Chicano Spanish a little, but often they don't understand what I'm saying. With most California Chicanas, I speak entirely in English, unless I forget. When I first moved to San Francisco, I'd rattle off something in Spanish, unintentionally embarrassing them. Often, it is only with another Chicana, Tejana, that I can talk freely. Words distorted by English are known as anglicisms or pochismos. The pocho is an anglicized Mexican or American of Mexican origin who speaks Spanish with an accent characteristic of North Americans and who distorts and reconstructs the language according to the influence of English. Tex-Mex or Spanglish comes most naturally to me. I may switch back and forth from English to Spanish in the same sentence or in the same word. With my sisters and my brother Nune and with Chicano Tejano contemporaries, I speak in Tex-Mex. From kids and people my own age, I picked up Pachuco. Pachuco, the language of the Zoot Suiters, is a language of rebellion, both against standard Spanish and standard English. It is a secret language. Adults of the culture and outsiders cannot understand it. It is made up of slang words from both English and Spanish. Ruca means girl or woman, vato means guy or dude, chale means no, simón means yes, churro is sure, talk is periquear, pillonar means petting, que gacho means how nerdy, ponte águila means watch out, death is called la pelona. Through lack of practice and not having others who can speak it, I have lost most of the Pachuco tongue. Chicano Spanish. Chicanos, after 250 years of Spanish Anglo colonization, have developed significant differences in the Spanish we speak. We collapse two adjacent vowels into a single syllable, and sometimes shift the stress in certain words, such as maíz, mais, cojete, cohete, We leave out certain consonants when they appear between vowels, lado, lao, mojado, mojao. Chicanos from South Texas pronounce F as J, as in fue, fue. Chicanos use archaisms, words that are no longer in the Spanish language, words that have been evolved out. We say semos, truje, aiga, ancina, and nadien. We retain the archaic J, as in jalar, that derives from an earlier H, the French alar, or the Germanic halon, which was lost to Standard Spanish in the 16th century, but which is still found in several regional dialects, such as the one spoken in South Texas. Due to geography, Chicanos from the Valley of South Texas were cut off linguistically from other Spanish speakers. We tend to use words that the Spaniards brought over from medieval Spain. The majority of the Spanish colonizers in Mexico and the Southwest came from Extremadura. Hernán Cortés was one of them, and Andalusia. Andalusians pronounce eye like a Y, and their Ds tend to be absorbed by adjacent vowels. Tirado becomes tirao. They brought el lenguaje popular, dialectos, y regionalismos. Chicanos and other Spanish speakers also shift eye to Y and Z to S. We leave out initial syllables, saying tar for estar, toy for estoy, hora for ahora. Cubanos and Puertorriqueños also leave out initial letters of some words. We also leave out the final syllables, such as pa for para. The intervocalic Y, the eye, as in tortilla, ella botella, gets replaced by tortilla or tortilla, ella botella. We add an additional syllable at the beginning of certain words, a tocar for tocar, a gastar for gastar. Sometimes we'll say, lavaste las vasijas. Other times, lavates, substituting the ates verb endings for the aste. We use anglicisms, words borrowed from English. Bola from ball, carpeta from carpet, máquina de lavar instead of lavadora from washing machine. Tex-Mex argot, created by adding a Spanish sound at the beginning or end of an English word, such as cuquear for cook, huachar for watch, parquear for park, and rapear for rape, is a result of the pressures on Spanish speakers to adapt to English. We don't use the word vosotros, vosotras, or its accompanying verb form. We don't say claro to mean yes, imagínate, or me emociona, unless we picked up Spanish from Latinas out of a book or in a classroom. Other Spanish-speaking groups are going through the same or similar development in their Spanish. Linguistic terrorism. Deslenguadas. Somos los del español deficiente. We are your linguistic nightmare, your linguistic aberration, your linguistic mestizaje, the subject of your burla. Because we speak with tongues of fire, we are culturally crucified. Racially, culturally, and linguistically, somos huérfanos. We speak an orphan tongue. Chicanos who grew up speaking Chicano Spanish have internalized the belief that we speak poor Spanish. It is illegitimate, a bastard language, and because we internalize how our language has been used against us by the dominant culture, we use our language differences against each other. Chicana feminists often skirt around each other with suspicion and hesitation. For the longest time, I couldn't figure it out. Then, it dawned on me. To be close to another Chicana is like looking into the mirror. We are afraid of what we'll see there. Pena, shame, low estimation of self. In childhood, we are told that our language is wrong. Repeated attacks on our native tongue diminish our sense of self. The attacks continue throughout our lives. Chicanas feel uncomfortable talking in Spanish to Latinas, afraid of their censure. Their language was not outlawed in their countries. They had a whole lifetime of being immersed in their native tongue. Generations, centuries in which Spanish was a first language, taught in school, heard on radio and TV, and read in the newspaper. If a person, Chicano or Latina, has a low estimation of my native tongue, she also has a low estimation of me. Often with Mexicanas y Latinas will speak English as a neutral language. Even among Chicanas, we tend to speak English at parties or conferences, yet, at the same time, we're afraid the other will think we're agringadas because we don't speak Chicano Spanish. We oppress each other, trying to out-Chicano each other, vying to be the real Chicanas, to speak like Chicanos. There's no one Chicano language, just as there is no one Chicano experience. A monolingual Chicana, whose first language is English or Spanish, is just as much a Chicana as one who speaks several variants of Spanish. A Chicana from Michigan, or Chicago, or Detroit is just as much a Chicana as one from the Southwest. Chicano Spanish is as diverse linguistically as it is regionally. By the end of this century, Spanish speakers will comprise the biggest minority group in the US, a country where students in high schools and colleges are encouraged to take French classes because French is considered more cultured. But for a language to remain alive, it must be used. By the end of this century, English, and not Spanish, will be the mother tongue of most Chicanos and Latinos. So, if you want to really hurt me, talk badly about my language. Ethnic identity is twin skin to linguistic identity. I am my language. Until I can take pride in my language, I cannot take pride in myself. Until I can accept as legitimate Chicano Texas Spanish, Tex-Mex, and all the other languages I speak, I cannot accept the legitimacy of myself. Until I am free to write bilingually and to switch codes without always having to translate, while I still have to speak English or Spanish when I would rather speak Spanglish, and as long as I have to accommodate the English speakers rather than having them accommodate me, my tongue will be illegitimate. I will no longer be made to feel ashamed of existing. I will have my voice, Indian, Spanish, white. I will have my serpent's tongue, my woman's voice, my sexual voice, my poet's voice. I will overcome the tradition of silence. My fingers move sly against your palm. Like women everywhere, we speak in code. Melanie K. /Kantrowitz. Vistas, corridos, y comida, my native tongue. In the 1960s, I read my first Chicano novel. It was City of Night by John Recchi, a gay Texan, son of a Scottish father and a Mexican mother. For days, I walked around in stunned amazement that a Chicano could write and could get published. When I read I Am Joaquin, I was surprised to see a bilingual book by a Chicano in print. When I saw poetry written in Tex-Mex for the first time, a feeling of pure joy flashed through me. I felt like we really existed as people. In 1971, when I started teaching high school English to Chicano students, I tried to supplement the required text with works by Chicanos, only to be reprimanded and forbidden to do so by the principal. He claimed that I was supposed to teach American and English literature. At the risk of being fired, I swore my students to secrecy and slipped in Chicano short stories, poems, a play. In graduate school, while working toward a PhD, I had to argue with one advisor after the other, semester after semester, before I was allowed to make Chicano literature an area of focus. Even before I read books by Chicanos or Mexicans, it was the Mexican movies I saw at the drive-in, the Thursday night special of $1 a carload that gave me a sense of belonging. Vámonos a las vistas, my mother would call out, and we'd all, grandmother, brothers, sisters, and cousins, squeeze into the car. We'd wolf down cheese and bologna white bread sandwiches while watching Pedro Infante and the melodramatic tearjerkers like Nosotros los Pobres, the first real Mexican movie that was not an imitation of European movies. I remember saying, Cuando los hijos se van, and surmising that all Mexican movies played up the love a mother has for her children and what ungrateful sons and daughters suffer when they are not devoted to their mothers. I remember the singing type westerns of Jorge Negrete and Miguel Aceves Mejia. When watching Mexican movies, I felt a sense of homecoming as well as alienation. People who were to amount to something didn't go to Mexican movies or bailes or tune their radios to bolero, rancherita, and corrido music. The whole time I was growing up, there was norteño music, sometimes called North Mexican border music, or Tex-Mex music, or Chicano music, or cantina, bar music. I grew up listening to conjuntos, 3 or 4-piece bands made up of folk musicians playing guitar, bajo sexto, drums, and button accordion, which Chicanos had borrowed from the German immigrants who had come to Central Texas and Mexico to farm and build breweries. In the Rio Grande Valley, Steve Jordan and Little Joe Hernandez were popular, and Flaco Jimenez was the accordion king. The rhythms of Tex-Mex music are those of the polka, also adapted from the Germans, who, in turn, had borrowed the polka from the Czechs and the Bohemians. I remember the hot, sultry evenings when corridos, songs of love and death on the Texas-Mexican borderlands, reverberated out of cheap amplifiers from the local cantinas and wafted in through my bedroom window. Corridos first became widely used along the South Texas-Mexican border during the early conflict between Chicanos and Anglos. The corridos are usually about Mexican heroes who do valiant deeds against the Anglo oppressors. Pancho Villa's song, La Cucaracha, is the most famous one. Corridos of John F. Kennedy and his death are still very popular in the valley. Older Chicanos remember Lidia Mendoza, one of the great border corrido singers who was called La Gloria de Texas. Her El Tango Negro, sung during the Great Depression, made her a singer of the people. The ever-present corridos narrated 100 years of border history, bringing news of events as well as entertaining. These folk musicians and folk songs are our chief cultural myth-makers, and they made our hard lives seem bearable. I grew up feeling ambivalent about our music. Country western and rock and roll had more status. In the 50s and 60s, for the slightly educated and agringado Chicanos, there existed a sense of shame at being caught listening to our music. Yet I couldn't stop my feet from thumping to the music, could not stop humming the words, nor hide from myself the exhilaration I felt when I heard it. There are more subtle ways that we internalize identification, especially in the forms of images and emotions. For me, food and certain smells are tied to my identity, to my homeland. Wood smoke curling up to an immense blue sky, wood smoke perfuming my grandmother's clothes, her skin, the stench of cow manure and the yellow patches on the ground, the crack of a .22 rifle and the reek of cordite, homemade white cheese sizzling in a pan, melting inside a folded tortilla. My sister Hilda's hot, spicy menudo, chile colorado, making it deep red, pieces of panza and hominy floating on top. My brother Carrito barbecuing fajitas in the backyard. Even now, and 3,000 miles away, I can see my mother spicing the ground beef, pork, and venison with chile. My mouth salivates at the thought of the hot, steaming tamales I would be eating if I were home. Si le preguntas a mi mamá, ¿qué eres? Identity is the essential core of who we are as individuals, the conscious experience of the self inside. Gershon Kaufman. Nosotros, los Chicanos, straddle the borderlands. On one side of us, we are constantly exposed to the Spanish of the Mexicans. On the other side, we hear the Anglos' incessant clamoring so that we forget our language. Among ourselves, we don't say nosotros los americanos, o nosotros los españoles, o nosotros los hispanos. We say nosotros los mexicanos. By mexicanos, we do not mean citizens of Mexico. We do not mean a national identity, but a racial one. We distinguish between mexicanos del otro lado and mexicanos de este lado. Deep in our hearts, we believe that being Mexican has nothing to do with which country one lives in. Being Mexican is a state of soul, not one of mind, not one of citizenship. Neither eagle nor serpent, but both. And like the ocean, neither animal respects borders. Dime con quién andas, y te diré quién eres. Tell me who your friends are, and I'll tell you who you are. Mexican saying. Si le preguntas a mi mamá, ¿qué eres? Te dirá, soy mexicana. My brothers and sisters say the same. I sometimes will answer, soy mexicana, and others will say, soy chicana or soy tejana, but I identified as raza before I ever identified as mexicana or chicana. As a culture, we call ourselves Spanish when referring to ourselves as a linguistic group and when copping out. It is then that we forget our predominant Indian genes. We are 70 to 80% Indian. We call ourselves Hispanic, or Spanish American, or Latin American, or Latin when linking ourselves to other Spanish-speaking peoples of the Western Hemisphere and when copping out. We call ourselves Mexican American to signify we are neither Mexican nor American, but more the noun American than the adjective Mexican, and when copping out. Chicanos and other people of color suffer economically for not acculturating. This voluntary, yet forced, alienation makes for psychological conflict, a kind of dual identity. We don't identify with the Anglo-American cultural values, and we don't totally identify with the Mexican cultural values. We are a synergy of two cultures with various degrees of Mexicanness or Anglo-ness. I have so internalized the borderland conflict that sometimes I feel like one cancels out the other and we are zero, nothing, no one. A veces no soy nada ni nadie, pero hasta cuando no lo soy, lo soy. When not copping out, when we know we are worth more than nothing, we call ourselves Mexican, referring to race and ancestry. Mestizo, when affirming both our Indian and Spanish, but we hardly ever own our black ancestry. Chicano, when referring to a politically aware people born and or raised in the U.S. Raza, when referring to Chicanos. Tejanos, when we are Chicanos from Texas. Chicanos did not know we were a people until 1965, when Cesar Chavez and the farm workers united, and I Am Joaquin was published and La Raza Unida Party was formed in Texas. With that recognition, we became a distinct people. Something momentous happened to the Chicano soul. We became aware of our reality and acquired a name and a language, Chicano Spanish, that reflected that reality. Now that we had a name, some of the fragmented pieces began to fall together. Who we were, what we were, how we had evolved. We began to get glimpses of what we might eventually become. Yet, the struggle of identities continues. The struggle of borders is our reality still. One day the inner struggle will cease and a true integration take place. In the meantime, tenemos que hacer la lucha. ¿Quién está protegiendo los ranchos de mi gente? ¿Quién está tratando de cerrar la fisura entre la India y el blanco en nuestra sangre? El chicano, sí, el chicano que anda como un ladrón en su propia casa. Los Chicanos, how patient we seem, how very patient. There is the quiet of the Indian about us. We know how to survive. When other races have given up their tongue, we've kept ours. We know what it is to live under the hammer blow of the dominant Norte-Americano culture. But more than we can count the blows, we count the days, the weeks, the years, the centuries, the eons, until the white laws and commerce and customs will rot in the deserts they've created, lie bleached. Humildes, yet proud. Quietos, yet wild. Nosotros, los mexicanos chicanos, will walk by the crumbling ashes as we go about our business. Stubborn, persevering, impenetrable as stone, yet possessing a malleability that renders us unbreakable. We, the mestizas and mestizos, will remain. Gloria Anzaldua was born in 1942 in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. At age 11, she began working in the fields as a migrant worker and then on her family's land after the death of her father. Working her way through school, she eventually became a school teacher and then an academic, speaking and writing about feminist, lesbian, and Chicana issues and about autobiography. She is best known for The Bridge Called My Back, Writings by Radical Women of Color, which she edited with Sherry Moraga, and Borderlands, La Frontera, the New Mestiza. Anzaldua died in 2004. How to Tame a Wild Tongue is from Borderlands, La Frontera. In it, Anzaldua is concerned with many kinds of borders, between nations, cultures, classes, genders, languages, when she writes, "So if you want to really hurt me, talk bad about my language." Anzaldua is arguing for the ways in which identity is intertwined with the way we speak and for the ways in which people can be made to feel ashamed of their own tongues. Keeping hers wild, ignoring the closing of linguistic borders, is Anzaldua's way of asserting her identity. If this video helped you, or if you enjoyed it, please like it and subscribe to my channel. It helps me to be able to keep supporting you all. If you have any requests for short stories or poetry or summaries and analyses, please let me know in the comments. And just dropping a comment to say thanks or hi also greatly helps me out. Feel free to ask me any questions related to your homework that you think I can help with. Stay lit with Simply Lit.